It's not that anyone is upset about the remake and remasters being constantly released, but the point is that publishers have realized that we don't get upset, and we are happy. And because of that, they are going to remaking every good game after the time, with 1/10 of the effort, and 100th of the risk of making a new game, remastering and remaking, and making money, because we love the experience of titles. With nostalgic, with the quality and technology of the day. This applies to critics, and it also affects the grades they give. It even got to the point where the most important launch game of a new console was a remake game. I wish all the remakes were like that. Anyway, do you know how much harder it would be if Electronic Arts wanted to make Dead Space 4? Do you know how much harder and riskier it was? But the first game is that everything is appreciated, and all of the stories, and a lot of good memories of it to reduce the risk and cost altogether. Again, I love playing remasters and remakes, and it's a lot more interesting than new games. But I think we're seeing a little bit more in 2 generations of remake and remaster. Remake is better, though. The creators of the old game have just upscaled to 1080p or 4K, and with the same old problems are published and so on. They also make a lot of money. I think if it's going to be a remaster or remake, it's got to be something like Resident Evil 4 Remake, which takes everything and your entire experience to a few levels and is the true meaning of a 9th generation game. Personally, I expect this from the remake of Silent Hill 2, and now that they haven't moved on to the new game, they'll have to multiply the experience of the second game in all possible areas. If we want to answer this question in a basic way and break the question of why we have seen so many remake and remasters in these years, we can count this items. So many indie creators have become so much and so many games are being made and published that the number of new ideas for creative titles is becoming less and less. And crazy new ideas come up with a lot of hard work to convince big publishers to spend on building a 3-play game, and most of them are in small titles. For big games, companies try to get back to the ideas that worked. The idea is that it's good. By remastering and remaking their successful titles, big companies go beyond using answered ideas and go straight to answered games instead of back-to-back ideas. Because it's a lot less risky. The world has become such that if they use the same successful idea that previous versions of a major franchise had in later versions, critics will say, "Oh, come on, that's not creativity." And if they come to change the game in a new version of a series, the same critics will say, "Oh, come on, it's gone from its roots." There was a time when companies like Capcom and Konami were going to get 3-play titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill and Metal Gear, and suddenly we saw 4 versions of these franchises coming out in 4 years. But today, the cost of one of these big games has gone up and the risk factors have increased a lot. So many companies have decided to make a lot of decisions about it. They take the easier way and make more money by remastering and remaking a game at a much lower cost than a new game from that franchise. In fact, the ultimate goal of all of these companies is ultimately money. And when they can make a lot of money by remastering and remaking their attractive titles, no company's board of directors will oppose it, because nobody hates money. In the 5th and 6th generations, the world of games, the state of the internet, the analytics sites, etc., it was very different from today. Different when I say, it was a whole other world, but today the situation is very different, because back then the name and magnitude of the game were enough to buy it. But today Metacritic and dozens of other factors can easily defeat the biggest names. Everyone else has become critical and analytical and has a platform to express their opinions. Incidentally, the importance of these comments, which I honestly think most of them are completely wrong and influenced by some people on big sites, has become much more and more, and the day when a bad atmosphere against a game or company is launched, it's over. It's as if selling a game and making a lot of money from the good memories of gamers has become a hugely lucrative economic plan for large and small companies, and they have learned this method. You know that we humans are prisoners of nostalgia and are constantly chanting that remembering the old good games was much better. Interestingly, in reality, those games weren't better at all, but we were better ourselves. We weren't too busy at the time, and we didn't look at the score of such a website to enjoy a game. But anyway, this sense of nostalgia is very special for players, and that's why when we hear that we are going to experience a game that we have a lot of great memories of it again with higher quality, we are very happy and definitely buy that version. As a result, the high profits of companies from a game they have already sold, and again remake it and remake and sell, and we are captive of nostalgia and buy. Eventually, these companies have a lot of employees who have to spend time on a new game, and suddenly, after years of hard work and expense for a new game, that game is a bad failure and becomes a huge loss. So what better way to make a profit with a lot less time, risk, and expense? The result is tons of remake and remasters. Of course, this is actually a combination of all the previous things I mentioned in this video, and it finally boils down to much less time, risk, and cost, more profit. Today, the news of the failure of a great new game sells much more than its success, and the sight of the failure and marginalization of a game is much more appealing to the audience, and hatred is strangely ingrained in the world of games, like everything else in today's world. The critics are all professional and their grades are absolutely true. All sites wait until the review of the few sites comes and then quickly pour their scores into Metacritic, which is very original and the result of their own thinking. Many big companies who see this is how they decide to publish a remake of their big games that have already received good scores and feedback so that critics treat it as a remaster, and that affects the previous success of the game or the good memories they have had of it, and criticizes it not very seriously and rigorously. In fact, aside from less work and less cost to make a game, there's also less risk factor in terms of reviews and scores for remake and remasters than a new issue of a great franchise. In general, these are the things that come to mind when we want to answer the main question in this video, and the sum total of these items in general has become a factor that in the last 1 or 2 generations we see more than the great new game, remaster, and great remake. And even as I said first, a company like Sony has created a generation relying on a huge remake title and starts and responds. Today, and in this video, we were not discussing whether it was good or bad to see so much remake and remaster, because it is a separate discussion, and the answer is not fixed at all, and it is a completely subjective subject that has both a lot of advantages and a lot of negatives. Today we've only talked about the reasons why we see so many remake and remasters, and in a separate video, we'll talk about the good and the bad. But overall, one thing is clear. When big companies want to remake and remaster their big and memorable titles, they should at least model projects like Demon's Souls remake, Shadow of the Colossus remake, and Final Fantasy VII remake. Fix the main game's problems and improve its experience, rather than 1080p, and with the same quality and the same bugs and camera problems from 2 generations ago. With all of these explanations and analyses of the answer to the question, why do we see so many remake and remasters, there is a simple and short answer. You know what the answer is? The answer is a simple equation. Remasters and remake games are thrifty for companies. If we were the president of a $100 million company and had a lot of great games in previous generations, we would have remastered them one by one. Who hates money, even with less risk?